We swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now, confirming this our sacred vow. That's the Druid's vow. My name's Arthur Pendragon. I'm generally known as King Arthur. I'm a senior Druid, and for me, it's full-time.
Right, it's a full-time Druid. And here we have our group of Druids, or, well, I mean, it's Brass and myself in mystic garb. Dan, can you see and hear? Dan?
Yes.
You can see all of us? You can all see and hear? No. Brass? No.
I can't see or hear Dan.
Okay. All right. Well, Dan, you want to hop off and hop back on?
Yeah.
Since you're the one not in costume.
I know. Sorry.
I know. So, yeah, hop off and hop back on in just a second, Dan. Like right now, if you haven't already done that, which it seems like you have. Okay, he's done it. Brass! Holy smokes, look at us.
Yeah. Somebody around here was looking forward to talking about Druids.
I know, and I'm like, so I have, like, I'm going to describe my Druidic garb here. I have a bathrobe that I stole from Caesar's palace.
Okay, appropriate.
Which I think is very apropos.
Yeah,
I think it works, right? And then I also have my wife's T-shirt on my head, as you can see by the tag.
Yeah.
So this is my Druidic garb, and I'm going to take off the T-shirt because it's really hot.
Yeah.
Really hot. And I'm also well. I'll leave the garb on. I'll leave the mystical.
Wow, save something for Dan.
Yeah, and also, like, we need to give this a whole mystical feel, and I feel like if I don't have flowing robes, this will all be for naught. Yeah. So, Brass, what are you wearing?
This is a gold chainmail.
Ooh.
That is basically as long as a scarf.
Mm-hmm.
It's really big. So I've just used that as like a headgear, as headwear. And then I've just got on, it's just a black tank top that I've dumped bleach on, and I didn't realize it, like the bleach came open in my bag, but it made the coolest design, eating holes in my tank top in strategic places. It's Sunday, so I'm not really dressed up.
There's your familiar in the back.
Yeah, she's out here scoping it.
Yeah. So while we wait for Dan here, because now he's disappeared for good, I just wanted to take a moment and sort of like acknowledge the fact that, and you mentioned this while we were getting ready, that there's a lot going on in the news, and we've really like dug into the news a lot in the previous 2 episodes, and we're kind of taking a break off of that, and we decided to go way off on this break. Right. But I'm particularly excited about this one because I feel like the Druids, it's basically like saying the zombies or the ghosts or they like a lot of what we understand about like these subjects, and kind of like Vlad the Impaler, right? Like there's a lot to talk about, but only a teensy bit of it is based on like fact, and the rest is based on like sort of like we've had to decipher a lot of like what Druids were, like who they represented, like all of those different things. So let me check up on Dan here. Where you at, fool? But and I think that's like, I think that kind of leaves a lot of room to play in, but it also like not Dan not being here, but like the Druids, it like not knowing so much about them leaves a lot of room for us to kind of expand on what we might think it is. But it also leaves like a lot of room for romance, which I think is what draws us specifically to this subject matter. just because like we're we like obviously like things that are fun and things that are interesting, and I think the Druids like it's no coincidence that like the talking about Druids and like the return of Druidism also coincided with the great Romantic movements, that people were just like, okay, let's go back to nature, let's go figure out like what we're all about. And inevitably, there he is, inevitably they landed hey Dan.
I see you.
Okay. All right,
I'm
okay,
here.
here we are.
Sorry, the
No,
computer
worries,
crashed.
no worries, no worries.
Oh, he's dead. Oh, there he is.
All right, so we were actually just talking, Dan, about how the Druids, like how talking about the Druids kind of coincided with Romantic movements, because as soon as people start going like, okay, we've got what we've got, what if we go back a little further? And you see that the Brits immediately, like boom, like no question, immediately end up with the Druids.
Mhm.
There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the most important reason for that is that the Druids left a lot behind. Like that culture left a lot behind. Oh yeah, and speaking of Brass sipping her drink, what are you drinking, Brassy?
I got out some Kentucky bourbon. It's called
Okay.
Buffalo Trace, and I'm drinking it right out of the bottle.
That's a good one.
My roommate's not home, and this is a chaser of hot tea with cream.
Nice. Oh, very, very Druidic. What are you drinking, Dan? Hemlock.
Moscow
Oh, no.
Mule.
Nice.
It's hot here. It's hot. It's hot this week.
Yeah, it looks.
Shout
it looks
out
warm.
to the mule.
Yeah.
Shout out to the cup. Shout out to the Iron Age, which is where the Druids start.
There you
Right.
go.
Now.
There you go, pal. And I'm drinking. Check this out. Black cherry soda.
Oh, I thought it was blood.
Yeah,
Oh,
no.
okay.
Black cherry soda
Druidic blood
with
sacrifice. Yeah.
with vodka.
All right.
And I have to say, it's not great.
Oh. Oh, you hate to
Like,
hear that.
This little attempt at mix. I think the bourbon would have probably have been better.
Plancha?
I'm not really sure what we'll mix with this. But I'll tell you what it's not. Vodka. Vodka is not what you mix with black cherry soda. All right. So Dan, yeah, you missed out on my headdress, which is actually
Well, he had a headdress.
which is my wife's T-shirt.
Just upside down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now he's a druid.
Now, yeah, not Druid.
Yeah.
Not Druid. So
This is like
anyway.
night before Halloween stuff. It's like, oh, quick, grab it. Put it on.
What are you supposed to be? I'm a Druid. Yeah. So I wanted to let's start at the beginning, right? Like,
Okay.
Druids is kind of a general name for like the shamans, priests, judges, ruling class.
Teachers,
They're an interesting.
healers.
What'd you say?
Yeah.
They were teachers and healers.
Teachers,
They were in
healers.
charge of teaching the kids, and they were in charge of healing the sick, and they were the negotiators at war.
There you
They
go.
would send in the druid. No one would hurt the druid, but the
Right.
druid would speak to both camps and calm down the conflict if they could stop conflict.
Yeah. So, and what were you going to say, Dan?
Well, it was interesting. So I always thought the Druids were just like this thing in like the British Isles.
No.
But apparently, like Druids, right? There's evidence of like Druidism.
Yeah.
In the Middle East.
Wait,
Yeah.
in the Middle East? What is that?
In Anatolia, which is an old name for Turkey, right? And we don't even know where we get the word Druid. It could have. Did you find something?
Well, I mean, isn't it like people of the oak? Doesn't it have to do with
Right,
like?
but the root of the word, we're not entirely sure what language it comes from, because it's not exactly Celtic or Irish or German. There's actually closer stuff to like an ancient Turkish language, right? So it's interesting. I always thought they were like a people, but they're like it's a cat within a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And what some of the stuff I was reading is that like they're akin to like the Magi or the Brahmins in India.
Brahmins.
Right, like
I've seen that Brahmanic comparison a lot.
right. That came up, and they're interesting because they're not chiefs, and they're not like a priest class as we would think of a priest class. They're like lawyer priests, judges.
Well, but I feel like the shamanic role, and this is me, right. Like this is my Joseph Campbell upbringing. You guys come at me if you want, but like my understanding is that shamans have played those roles of judges and teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So and religious teachers. So I feel like it still falls into the world of shamans and like what's the the role of the shaman in like kind of Celtic society, but then it's also like a class of people, like the judiciary would be
right,
like for us, right? Like they're basically civil servants civil servants slash priests. You know,
well, the closest I can think of them is like the priest class in like Aztec culture,
right,
or something. But they're not exactly that either. Like they're very strange. And
it's a slippery category.
And there's so much like there's so much baggage on top of what they are because they were used like. You know, there was propaganda against them because they were. I feel like they were civil leaders. They led the Celtic tribes against the Romans, right? Like,
yeah, and I think so. I think that touches on an important point, right? Like number one, as Romans gotta Rome, right? And I think one of the most important things about the Druids is that they got a kind of a double shellacking, right? So here I'm for some visuals here. So I think this is kind of like a classic, like this is a romantic vision of what we consider Druidism to look like, and you'd see white dudes and white things with white beards.
It's Gandalf the White.
Yes.
That's the Druid.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
He comes out of the forest, right? Like, obviously, he's a Druid.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. With, staffs and using herbs and all of that kind of stuff. Very much in line with the mythology of that space. But so what we do know about Druids, like factual knowledge and factual, right? Knowledge of Druids, like contemporary knowledge, is all drawn from the conquerors, from the
Romans.
The Romans, yeah. And so this is like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I decided to go for Britannica on this one because I feel like the British have there's a sense of self attached to their definitions of Druids and certain things, from a British perspective, that I thought was important to kind of note, like what we saw from Brother Druid Pendragon in the opening, right? Like that it speaks to them, and there are folks who have made Druidism and understanding or at least interpreting what they think are Druidic practices, I guess is the term. It's important to them. So I felt like getting Encyclopedia Britannica's take on this is important. So this is like the opening line of Druidism, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Druid, a member of the learned class among the ancient Celts.
Period?
Wait, they acted as priests, teachers, and judges, period. That's the first, those are the first two sentences about them. Then, so, I mean, that kind of speaks to how all of us are just kind of like, well, they're this and this and this. But I think the important part here is that they were, in fact, the learned class. And I think putting it in that kind of like perspective, it's like, well, have you read a book? Then you're a Druid. Have you not? You're not a Druid, right? And I think that's kind of the understanding.
Well, it leads to a thing. I mean, I don't know much. Maybe we can do this another time. Like, were the Celts? Because my view of Celts is a bunch of naked people painted blue with huge mustaches running around killing things, right? But obviously they're more than that.
Right.
But like, were they a strict caste system?
I mean,
I don't know.
I don't believe so.
no, I don't.
And I have
think so
again,
either.
I mean, right
we're
from like
talking
what we
about a
know, right from what we know generally, they and what we know is from the conquerors and the Romans, they were the wild men, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
And in fact, let's talk a little bit about that, right? The earliest known records of the Druids come from the 3rd century BCE, and their name comes from knower of the oak tree, right? That's the thing. So here's the last caveat from Britannica. Very little is known for certain about the Druids because they kept no records of their own.
they believed in an oral culture. They wrote nothing down because their knowledge was too sacred to be put in mundane, three-dimensional material.
Yep.
mhm.
That's absolutely right.
Everything was orally passed on. When you kill the last Druid, you've effectively killed the practice. So what we do have written down could arguably be said, well, it's not the true Druidism history. It's what the Romans wrote down as what they saw before they wiped him out.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Exactly.
we're really at a strange impasse here. Will we ever find the truth? I don't know how we're going to find the truth.
Yeah.
Because who here among us in 2020 still walks and talks with the Druids?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
They're kind of like the
On
Jedi.
YouTube.
They
Did
are
anybody
kind of like
YouTube the
the
Druids? Raise your hand if you YouTubed the Druids before we met today. A lot, yeah. Alf, how many theater people did you see? I mean,
only.
just tell the truth,
Only.
Alf. They're theater people. They're theater people who also have a respect for the history, but they're theater people at heart. Are they
Yeah,
not?
I agree.
Mm.
I agree. So let's talk a little bit about how the and I think that's exactly to the point, right? And I think part of why we're also kind of excited about to talk about this is because with so little fact to go on, conjecture becomes the replacement, and so we can actually revel in some of the more mystic parts of like the conjecture and ideas that come around here, which we probably wouldn't do in another subject that was like more documented. So I think that's really exciting. But let's get the documentation out of the way so that we can be just like, okay, now let's get to the fun magic and sacrifice and murder and whatnot. So there we have. Let me switch up this image too, because we basically have variations on white bearded man in nature. But anyway, so according to Julius Caesar, there were two groups of men in Gaul that were held in honor: the Druids and the noblemen. So we know that Druids are not noblemen, and again, that kind of helps out my idea of like civil servants, kind of.
Was the Druid a fluid caste that anybody could join if you got it, or did you have to, or were the Druids sons of noble people that became trained?
That's a good question. We should ask a Druid. Oh wait, they were all killed.
Yeah.
Right.
You know. But I think that's a fair question. I'm going to say that like what our favorite historic answer, which is probably both, right? I think that because of the shamanic qualities of Druidism, that if somebody was a little bit possessed by by the gods, they were probably ushered into like a certain part of being a Druid. Even if they came from humble beginnings, whereas if I think it could be all of the above, but again, conjecture. We have no idea.
Right.
So here we go. Just real quick here. Caesar related that Druids took charge of public and private sacrifices, and that many young men went to them for instruction. So basically, you're just like, you were in the forest and you met with a young lady, and then suddenly you've got to boil somewhere. You go talk to the druid. That's what it sounds like to me.
Sounds like a dungeon master.
Yeah. Well, and I mean all of these things, right? Like Gandalf, dungeon master,
Merlin,
right? Merlin, like all of these we know are based on sort of these ideas of druidism. So here we go. If anyone disobeyed their decree, he was barred from sacrifice. So the ritual of sacrifice was the main ritual for the Celtic tribes.
Okay.
If you disobeyed the Druids, they wouldn't let you attend sacrifice.
So it's basically like in the Catholic Church, you're barred from taking the Eucharist. It's sacrifice.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
We might be on a road here.
Yeah. Nice. One Druid was made chief. Upon his death, another was appointed. If, however, several were equal in merit, the Druids voted and sometimes resorted to armed violence, so Druids going at each other. Once a year, the Druids assembled at a sacred place in the territory of the Carnutes, which is believed to be the center of all Gaul, and all legal disputes were submitted to the judgment of the Druids.
Now, Gaul is in France, right?
Yes, Gaul is in France.
Strange to me.
Why is that strange to you?
Well, in the sense that we associate the hub of Druidism to the British Isles. People would emigrate from Europe to learn, to come and immerse themselves in the Druid culture, and then go back to practice Druidism on the continent. But Gaul,
and that's what I think is
a lot in the Druid story. Gaul, France, hello.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like this is my wife and I at Stonehenge during the winter solstice there. But I mean, and I think in the background, obviously, is the menhirs, the monoliths there, and those are peppered all through France, Brittany, the British Isles and Ireland. So the stone markings of that culture. Basically are in France and then kind of do this little wave like up through the Isles.
And this leads us to I think just about the Celts. Like the Celts, we think of obviously Ireland and Britain first.
Those are your blue naked people.
Right.
Right there.
Right, and Scotland. And then, you have Brittany there on the coast of France. But the Portuguese, the Basques, certain strains of Slavic people.
Yes.
As I said, the Turkish people, Romans, Italian people, all like the Celts were all through Europe into the Middle East, right? They weren't just this. In our minds, modern minds, we have them up in England, but they were a huge culture that was really varied. And something that I thought was interesting was like, so did each like little tribe or village have a druid? Or were druids like regional managers? Or
well, it wasn't like a pyramid scheme, I don't think. I guess if you looked closely enough, it would be a pyramid scheme. But they would literally test. It was like they'd audition for different tribes, and if the druid had a good fit and had a good feeling about the people in that tribe, they would stay and work for that society.
So the druids weren't necessarily, as from what you're saying, did not have to be members of a certain tribe or village. They could move around.
They would join that village. They would join that society and say, "Let me heal you. Let me instruct you on when to plant and when to harvest. Let me instruct you on how to talk to your warring neighbor.
This brings me to an interesting thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I mean, you get the gist.
The legend of Saint Patrick feels very Druid-ish.
Watch out now.
Right? Because he wasn't Irish.
Right.
As far as we know.
Good point. And I think like I put this picture up, but if you guys look closely, here's a picture of druids, some of them sitting up on an oak tree. They've got their sides, they're collecting mistletoe. And then on the left is a bunch of priests and bishops with a cross coming at them. And I think this, obviously like not a period piece, but it is an interpretation of that clash of cultures.
Right.
And I think we know that like a lot of the Christmas traditions date back to Druidic practices, including mistletoe. And so there's no reason to believe that St. Patrick stands alone, right? Like that, there's not some borrowing of those traditions. I do want to.
Except today, you get to kiss somebody under mistletoe instead of being sacrificed.
Correct.
So things are a little better.
So just one quick thing here. Caesar also recorded that the Druids abstained from warfare and paid no tribute. So in that way, they were kind of like churchy in the sense that they paid no tribute and abstained from warfare, even though like 3 sentences up, they talk about Druids going at each other for control of the main Druid like throne or whatever.
Druid Pope.
Yeah, the Druid Pope. Exactly.
Their tribute was their service, though. They acted as a servant to the communities. Instead of paying them money, they worked it off by showing them medicine, by showing them education, by showing them negotiation. They served as opposed to be paid or paying out.
Right.
So here,
and you see that across cultures, though, across the world, is that the priestly class doesn't have to pay. Even in our world, churches don't pay taxes, right?
Like, I think what's his name? The guy who wrote Jay and Silent Bob.
Kevin Smith.
Kevin Smith, yeah. Kevin Smith made like an interesting. It could have been in Chasing Amy, but basically he makes the observation that if you're in Tibet and you have 2 choices, become a Buddhist monk or carry hay up a hill for the rest of your life, becoming a Buddhist monk certainly looks nice. And so in the same way, this is from Caesar's account, attracted by the privileges, many joined the order voluntarily or were sent by their families. So that, I think, answers your question, Dan, about whether or not like it was cross class. I think basically you too can be a Druid, but also you couldn't be just any old schmuck and become a Druid, because they studied ancient verse, natural philosophy, astronomy, and the lore of the gods, spending as much as 20 years in training. And remember, this is with no written tradition. So literally you have to sit there and listen to another Druid. That's why they've all got white beards, because it takes 20 years to graduate. You know, let's say you're what, like you're 18, you're 20 when you decide you're going to become a Druid. You're 40 by the time you just finished being a Druid and you're coming into like serve your community. So it makes sense that, you know, it's always these old bearded men if the training takes 20 years. Also, it really helps separate like people who aren't really that committed to Druidism and just kind of wanted to escape, you know, the humdrum of Bronze Age life.
Like
I find that the white beard thing, though, is like Socrates always has a white beard.
Yeah.
Moses has a beard. That's a very, I don't want to say modern, but that's how we in the West associate wisdom. Is you get a big white beard, right? And like, in fact, literally, I call the gray and white hairs in my beard my wisdom.
Oh, there you go.
So I would die to see you with a full beard. I'll have to check with your wife on that, but I would die to see you with a full beard.
I'll show you some pictures. Lamont's seen it.
Yeah.
All right.
My Druid. Sorry. That's the name of my beard. My Druid.
Yeah.
All right. So verbal lore. The Druids were said to believe that the soul was immortal and passed at death from one person into another.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's literally like somebody dies and then their soul comes into me, or would it be more like Buddhism where
a new baby?
Yeah, the baby. I'd prefer it if it were the baby.
Yeah.
BH.
It feels very like Buddhist.
Yeah.
Y'all remember
so, like
that
the
Steve Martin movie, All of Me, with Lily Tomlin? All of Me?
Yes.
Steve Martin?
Yeah. Yes.
Get into it.
Yeah.
Back in bowl. The soul can move. The soul moves around and looks for a vessel. You can hold it in a bowl, or you can give it to another person to incarnate.
Dang.
I think the Druids were onto that, and that was before we had microscopes and computers and, frankly, anything that could see up into the sky with any clarity. These people knew about that. I'm just saying, it reminds me of the indigenous people of our Aussie, oi, oi, oi episode. It reminds me of native tradition.
Yeah, and I think that's,
well, go with it. Yeah.
No. It's funny because when we think of England, we think of colonizers, but one of my favorite things to look at, one of my favorite lenses to look at Europe, is think of it as an indigenous culture unobstructed. And that is what happens when like certain indigenous groups, like, and granted, the Romans did a good job of sort of messing that up from the start, but really, like, a lot of indigenous traditions across Europe have survived through the ages. And if you look at, especially in the Alps, some of the traditions that go on there of like dressing up in fur and dancing around with bells and things like that, like that is a direct line from people who were living in caves trying to scare away bears, all the way to, you know, these bankers and chocolate makers and watchmakers living in chalets that once a year put on their furry coat and dance around with bells. I think that's always an interesting window into Europe, and that's why I don't, you know, like you could very easily look at the whatever King Arthur of the modern day Druids that we saw in the beginning, and you could be like, this guy's kind of a weirdo. But if you think of it as somebody who's getting in touch with their indigenous roots, it has a little bit more significance than just a theater person who wants to be Merlin.
Right.
So I think that's a valuable insight, Brassy, and I think that it's something that folks should kind of take away from this, that we're talking about an indigenous culture.
And on your point, I found this interesting. I was reading some stuff. There are Druid groups that are demanding from museums the return of remains.
Y'all,
honestly,
I got something for you. So when Sonia and I were when we went to the winter solstice at Stonehenge, number one, King Arthur that you guys saw in that opening credit, he was there and he ran the whole ceremony. But number two, as we were walking up in the rain at 5 a.m. On a winter's morning in the middle of the Salisbury Plain, there were Druid protesters that were in front of the Stonehenge like visitor center, where everybody was parking, saying, like, with chanting, "Honor the ancestors, return the bones."
Whoa!
Yeah.
Right?
Whoa!
Crazy.
Okay.
There's a thing
Whose
there,
bones
right?
They got? Whose bones?
Well, they've got
like the British
Museum.
The British Museum has got like skeletons from some of these mounds and stone and wood hedges.
Yeah.
Dan, what do you?
And they want it back so they can put them back in, I don't know, in the mounds. Yeah.
And and again, like, that is very similar to a lot of the native like movements that we've got going there. So I want to keep this going. There is something that I read, which I think is kind of like that's of import. And again, it helps us kind of figure out who these folks are. And it said, and I cannot vouch for the veracity of this statement because the origins are a little bit muddled. But it said that the Order of Druids was divided into 3 sections. The bards were charged with preserving the music and stories of their society. The ovates practiced medicine and also acted as clairvoyants, and clairvoyancy is going to play a big role in Druidism. So just hold that in your head. And then the Druids, with a capital D, were the philosophers and the teachers, much like Aristotle and Plato were their own society. They also acted as judges in time of need. So basically, like, again, that plays into sort of the civil servant aspect of it, where like a druid will fulfill all of these roles for a specific town. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting is there's also some writing about female druids, and this image that I'm showing right now is a romantic drawing of what someone is depicting as a female druid, and she's standing there in front of a stone monolith, and she has the golden sickle, and she has a sprig of mistletoe on her hand. And she also looks fucking intense. Like, she is not taking any shit. And I think that there's some talk of these of a female order of druid, similar to like Vestal virgins, like nuns, like these sort of kept groups of women who were powerful in magic, who did that divination. And I think that like, it makes sense to me that would exist in a culture that spanned so much space and that spanned so much time. But as with women of a mystical background, and Brass will know about this, is that very often those women are the first to be written out. So while we have very little to go off of about what the druids were actually like, we have even less to go off of what female druids might have been like and what purposes they may have served. And so with that, I indemnify myself of any knowledge of this and look to you guys to maybe chime in.
Can I do one thing real quick?
Sure.
What I'm seeing on
my
screen, what I'm seeing is the body of the painting.
Yeah.
And literally on top is Brass as the head of the painting.
Is that better?
I'm not kidding. That's what I'm seeing. All right.
So
let's go on.
Let's think of it like this. If the male druids are the engine block that keeps this thing running, the female druids are the gasoline. Sometimes you have to burn gasoline to get the engine going. Women are considered to have divine feminine power.
Sure.
Divine chaos. We can literally make life in our body.
Right.
We are considered expendable in some religions, sad as it is to say, because we have tapped into that divine, we embody that divine feminine, and we can tap into the source. So when you have a group of women, I can't believe no one's brought up the Christopher Lee movie, The Wickerman.
Oh.
I think we're just sitting on it.
Yeah, we're just sitting on it. Believe you me.
But you know how they always ask the maidens to take their clothes off and jump over the fire? We're gasoline. We are the fuel to the engine. We needed the men to make the engine. The engine is without emotion. The engine is without movement. But you add the female element, and suddenly your pistons are firing, and now you've got something. So women are often first to be sacrificed and the first to be victimized. When colonists come through, when conquerors come through, they grab the women and children first because it breaks the morale of the tribe.
Yeah.
Women are the givers. Women are the producers of life. So if you hurt them first, you're fighting a one-legged battle at that point. Sad to say.
That's brilliant. When you were saying that, Brass, it made me think of, the ballet, The Rite of Spring.
Yeah.
And they pick the girl to sacrifice, and she dances herself to death.
Yes.
Like literally the gasoline
to
get it moving, right?
Yeah.
Without her innate energy, you've just got an engine sitting still. You add that feminine, holy, feminine, divine energy, and suddenly you've got a car that moves.
And I think any man who is married will tell you that without that feminine energy, nothing works.
No, nothing gets done.
I'll look out the window.
Like it's yeah, it
Nothing
is my
gets done.
no. There is I have a shelf life of 3 days with my wife out, and then everything starts to crumble.
Right.
Oh.
I know, mystic.
Well,
Then it's
all
just
right.
then.
Hey, can I congratulate you for admitting that? That's an amazing statement you've just made. And all glory to Tonya. All glory to Tonya. You just admitted that publicly. I love you.
There's no question about it. There's no question about it.
I love you for that. Tonya is the gasoline in your
she is
engine.
the gasoline.
Believe
100%. 100%.
Believe it.
All right.
What's your shelf life, Dan?
What's your shelf life?
Well, let's just say I get a lot more done on the weekends than I do during the week because Sarah's at home.
We got to talk about astrology sometime away from Alf. I can't wait to talk. Okay.
No, it's right though. It is the gasoline. They get you moving.
So, all right,
because like after a couple days, it's just watching Frasier reruns over and over and over and over again.
All right, let's talk.
I don't know what I expected.
Let's keep this moving. Let's keep this moving because we've acknowledged the gasoline. Let's talk about actually burning people. Yeah, I know this is actually the best part of. Oh shit! Brass
Is everybody okay?
You dropped your phone. No, we're all very excited about this, and if you guys look on the bottom right hand here, there is a dramatic interpretation, a romantic interpretation of a druidic ceremony at Stonehenge, and you can see the stone circle, but you also see animals being led to sacrifice. You see naked ladies. You see a lot of people dancing. There's fire. There's snakes. There's good stuff happening. Like this is the shit right here. Like I mean, the best part about Druidism is the horny sacrifice party aspect,
right?
Of it. And I do want to say that when
it's like a UNC theater department party.
It looks exactly like a UNC theater department party.
Don't out us like that.
We outed ourselves.
So I do want to say that when I say horny sacrificial like takes on all of this, that is not me projecting my lustful desires and love of pagan worship onto this program. There have been recent excavations around Stonehenge that basically say that it served as the spot for a winter party where the tribes would bring their young people in to meet and to get ready for spring.
Yeah.
So this was like a
little mixer.
A mixer to bind tribes and villages together.
But no,
to look for to put families together.
Just to keep the peace, though.
Yeah,
like
but what I'm wondering is this where fathers came and bartered sons and daughters to form together alliances?
Subscribe to that. They didn't subscribe.
Yeah,
to
I know. Like the vibe I get is that it was kind of a free for all. I might be projecting.
No. I think you're correct.
But the vibe I get was that it was a free-for-all, and I think that there's a lot of indicators that it was a messy situation, right? So near Stonehenge, there's like a wood henge, and there's also like a path leading from the river up to like Stone and Wood Henge, and I believe that like all of this was like basically like the campsites at Coachella, and that
only cleaner.
Sorry.
Only they were more clean than the campsites at Coachella.
Hey, we don't know that.
We don't know. I know Yeah. So here you see this romantic depiction of this festival. I'm not sure how many actual bulls and horses there were, and I don't know if the clothing is quite right, but I think we can all like basically say that the idea of these lusty, violent, musical, colorful pagan rituals, it captured the imagination. Why would they capture the imagination? Well, because there's all of these stories about Druidic practices. So let's get into it. That's.
I like the way that was actually a silent burp that you were doing, just getting through it.
So let's get into it, right? Like let's talk about these practices, because I think it's so interesting how like all of these different things, like they mesh into our mythology, and who knows at this point what they are. So the first thing are spells, right? The idea of spells, and they were called geas or geas, Geas. So sorry to the Druids who are watching. Yeah. I think geas, right? So
I guarantee you, since that's probably Celtic, it sounds nothing like that.
Yeah.
Oh, we're butchering.
It's probably got an F sound in it somewhere.
Yeah.
Does?
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
All right. So, since the Druids were involved in foresight or prophecy, one of their powers could be the ability to invoke a geas on someone. In the Irish mythology, a geas was a rule or spell preventing someone from doing something at the risk of dying. So, like, you're just like a curse on you if you do this, right? And you will die if you do this. Very, very, like, politically speaking, what an awesome tool to have in your arsenal, right? Like, you're a druid, you say some magic words, an incantation, and you tell the person that whatever they're thinking of doing, they better not do it or they're going to die. That's pretty good.
That's like witches protesting the government.
Exactly.
Same thing, same vibe.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you use the tools that you have, and the thing is, like, the belief system was equal. So imagine like the witches protesting the government today, but everybody believes that actually will work. Then you can act. The witches have actual power. So this was seen. These things were seen as a blessing or a curse, depending on the situation. Usually it was heroes affected by a geas who sometimes brought about their doom when they were forced to break their geas. So it was all it was all part of the mythology of like self-sacrifice. If I do this, I will die, but I will save my people. Right. And I will sacrifice myself. I think all of that like plays into it. But the fact that these spells were part of the Druids, and then you think about like all of these tales of witchcraft and all of these tales of wizards, and you kind of see like that mixture. And also, I think it's important right now that we're talking about spells. Let's give a shout out to one of the more present day famous Druids, Albus Dumbledore, right? I mean, like Dumbledore, also a Druid, because he is a descendant of Merlin, I think, and the whole kit and caboodle. And don't tell me that that Harry. It's a coincidence that Harry Potter came out of the land of the Druids. Like when people are casting spells as part of your prehistory, obviously that's going to be an important part of it. So
well, and the interest in Britain of the Druids is we talked about how it's like a cultural thing in Britain, but like, so Britain is, and you talked about it earlier, Brass, like in Gaul, Britain was basically like the Rome of Druidism. You went and studied in Britain
and then go home.
And then you would go back to your own thing. Right? Obviously it was Hogwarts.
There you go.
Which probably has a lot of oaks in it, I bet.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's the trees play a really important part in Hogwarts.
Well, there we go. Hobbit.
Oh, I mean,
well, yes. On the trees.
There's it's so obvious why Gandalf reappears as the White in the Fangrain Forest.
Yeah.
Where else? Of course he would. Where else would he possibly be?
Yeah. Okay. So let's keep going here of awesome things that Druids did. So the other thing that they were known for is clairvoyance. And in ancient Ireland, there was the tradition of, and again, I'm going to murder this, but imbus forosnai, imbus forosnai, which was the gift of clairvoyance. It was a
It's
practice.
a good whiskey.
Is it? Is it?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
No, I just
That's in
it's
Vino
all
Veritas.
whiskey.
I would not doubt that a whiskey's been named imbus fornosai or forosnai, whatever. It was supposedly practiced by the great poets of Celtic Ireland. For the Celts, spiritual truth was usually conveyed through poetry. Nowadays, that part is still true for a lot of folk, but we do feel a bit shortchanged on the lack of clairvoyance. Okay, that's just a stupid like side commentary on it. But the idea of being able to tell the future or to have insight into the world of the gods and passing it on through song definitely melts in with this idea that the Druids had an exclusively oral tradition, right? And that helps explain why in a lot of these Celtic cultures, like in Ireland, like in Scotland, the role of the troubadour, the role of song, plays a much more important role in the conveyance of everything from, like, I think we started and ended a lot of the 1916 episode with Irish songs of rebellion, because in Ireland, the telling of the oral history is done through song. And so it makes sense that this might be a callback all the way back to the Druids, because they too had an oral history. And I think that this speaking of this clairvoyance and all of and these spells, all of that kind of speaks to that. All right. So
it's interesting because, sorry, when you think of like, not necessarily modern day Ireland, but like when you read old folk tales of Ireland, right? There's always this thing about you can't go out on the fishing boats today because the clouds are coming in from the west and the waves are from the east, and right, like this big thing for telling the future, and it always works out. The sun always falls off the boat and drowns, right?
Yeah.
But you can trace this back through Irish culture all the way to the Roman times.
And soothsayers played a large role in Celtic culture. I mean, in ancient cultures, period. Right. And then I think that to me like speaks a lot to the fact that the Druids like fulfilled that shamanic role for the Celtic tribes. So I wanted to get into the number 3, and it's important in Druidism. So, Brass, why don't you enlighten us about why, from a mystical standpoint, the number 3 might be important?
3, if we leave history out of it, 3 is the minimum number that you need to make a solid foundation. If you have a stool with 3 legs, you will sit solidly, comfortably. You can't do it with 2. 4 is 1 too many. So 3 is considered a holy number in many cultures for being just enough support to make a solid foundation. The pyramids, 3 points, top, bottom, and over. Stools, things like that. Well, I believe the Triskelion, is that what that's called? The Triskelion?
Yeah.
One of my favorite side topics for future reference, everybody, is the island. Wow, I've had so much bourbon. There's very few countries that have Triskelions on their flag, and Sicily is one of them.
Oh, interesting.
I would love to jump into Sicily in future. The Triskelion is 3 legs, or for lack of a better word, there's 3 spirals here in our visual. 3 is the minimum you need. 1 is the leader and 2 are supports. But anything can shift at any time and it's still equal. So 3 is considered a holy number in Christianity, the Holy
Father,
Trinity.
Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity.
All of that.
And we see that repeated over and over and over.
Going back to Egyptian times, it was Father, Son, and Mother.
Right, and that's what I wanted to get on.
My old Protestant background there, but you need 3 to make a solid foundation. Anything other than that is wonderful, but you need 3.
Mhm.
3 is required.
And I think Brass just hit on why 3 is sacred, because it's mother, father, child.
Baby.
That's
yeah.
why 3 is the sacred number for human beings, probably cross culturally, because
Yeah.
that's what it is,
Yeah.
right?
I'm in
Agreed.
agreement.
Agreed.
It means that our belief moves forward. That number 3 baby
Right.
moves
Is the
us
future.
forward after we perish. So it's
Right.
important to see through to the future. You make something for the future investment. You may not be around to enjoy it, but the holiness is you sacrificed that to go forward while you perish.
So I think and the Druids I think were keenly aware of this. I think this is one of those things where that Joseph Campbell would refer to as a monomyth, where it speaks to literally every culture. The idea of 3s, triptychs, pyramids, all of these things are incredibly important, and the Druids were no exception to this. And the idea of 3s actually carried a lot more weight. So one of the things that and I think this is just going to fold into sacrifice. So a lot of the rituals around Druidism had the number 3 around them. And one of the most important sacrifices for them was called hang on just a second because I want to get this right, the threefold death.
Oh, listen, many secret societies participate in a threefold death ritual.
Oh yeah?
Initiation. Many secret societies.
So
Do the Masons?
So yeah, explain to us, like, what would yes, Grandpa goes to the temple every at the end of every 3 weeks and then shows up and they
No. What I mean is the initiation ceremony for like the Masons and the Oddfellows all involve
ritual
the initiate dying,
fake death,
and being reborn,
yes. And being risen from the grave.
Reborn.
You're
as a
risen
member.
from the grave. Yeah.
Right.
So do you want to give us like any examples, Brassy, of secret societies that might have used the triple death?
Well, Christianity would be a great one. It's not secret, but Christianity is a great symbolism of we made a boy, we sacrificed the boy. Step 3 is we liberate the people with the boy.
Right, and
that's Jesus's role.
Yeah, and
right.
Again, the
created, killed, immortality. That's how secret societies keep thriving.
I think there's a little bit of a difference. Yeah, I like the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. I think is important. But this is like
choice, though. In this ritual, it's a choice. It's not I woke up in my mother's arms and I'm like, here now. It's I choose to die. I choose to be reborn a different person, a different man.
The rebirth is of like sending the soul elsewhere rather than the present plane.
And it's a purification. It's a purification ceremony insofar as you leave behind your bad habits. You leave behind your old persona. You leave behind your mistakes. You realize the lesson, you value the lesson, and you go forward as a strong leader, as a strong embodiment of pure man. Harama Biff,
So the Druids in particular, the threefold death for the Druids was an actual physical sacrifice. It was a method of sacrificing people. And I'm going to show a gnarly image here of a preserved-ish sort of skeleton. And so this is the threefold death. Has an individual has 3 simultaneous causes of death: wounding, hanging, and drowning, for example. But from the 10th century in the 10th century, there was a claim that the threefold death were sacrifices to the deities Tutatis, Asus, and Tyrannus, and they were done by drowning, hanging, and burning, respectively. So a person would be drowned, hung, and burnt all in one go. I don't know how you drown someone and burn someone at the same time.
I can tell you there was a lot of smoke if you'd ever burned.
I bet it smelled terrible.
Pops and sizzles.
I want to point out the 4 elements right here. Drowning is water.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Hanging is air.
Okay.
Burning is fire. And then where do you bury bodies?
Earth.
The ground. There you go.
You
Nice
represent
work.
the 4 elements in balance.
And I mean, like,
1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're reborn. So the Chinese believe in 5 elements, metal being the 5th element.
Not love.
Certain wisdom traditions would argue that ether, the actual outer space
Right.
ether,
Right.
is the 5th element. There's, you can go back and forth on that. There's no right or wrong. It's once you have been drowned with water, once you have been suffocated of air, once you have been burned to ash, the alchemy of your body back into the earth creates a new baby, and you are an ethereal being when you are reborn. Again, this is a choice you make in this 3-dimensional life in a secret society. You
Got it.
choose to be sacrificed and say, I'm no longer that old person. I wish to grab onto the new person and continue to be a better person, a better incarnation of myself. But you got to include the 4 elements to become the 5th. Also, shout out to Luc Besson.
And I do want to say that, like, ritual sacrifice for the Druids was an essential part of their ceremonies. And that was like, and usually the people that they would sacrifice. Now this is kind of and this is reported by the Romans, right? So you can kind of take it as a grain of salt. But the story goes that the people that were sacrificed were usually convicted people who in a way deserved it. And that
So-
rarely would they just randomly go off and pick people. So basically people from other tribes that might have been captured or
Criminals.
criminals, right? And those
So
sacrificed.
So something I want to jump in here that I was reading was this. There obviously we have bodies and we have evidence that there was human sacrifice done by the Druids and the Celts, but it might have. The Romans probably blew it up to show them to be these because at this time
Exactly.
Rome sacrificed animals. Rome didn't sacrifice human beings except for entertainment, which is the only reason to sacrifice a person, right? But they didn't do it religiously at this time, at least as far as I know about Roman culture. So, and it was scandalous, right? So to show that your enemies, these wild tribesmen up in the forests of Europe, were sacrificing people left and right and killing Roman soldiers, right? Because I guarantee you they probably did use Roman soldiers that were captured
Of course.
for their sacrifice. And we don't even know how much they did sacrifice. Like, I read a thing that, like, sacrifice was done as, like, if there was a famine and it was like a last resort sort of thing.
That was their unplug it and replug it in. That's their hard reboot.
Right, like we've killed every single animal we can possibly think of. Nothing's working. We're gonna have to go with a human, and so they used like condemned criminals, which what I was reading is apparently like the Celtic gods preferred bad people because something about the being condemned to death was preferred by their gods. Versus, as you said, Brass, and in a lot of cultures, the voluntary sacrifice is more preferred, right? But for some reason, the condemned was preferred, or they would use a captured, a slave or a captured, or a war, a POW sort of thing. But they didn't sacrifice as much as we sort of romanticize, I think, is what I read. But I could be wrong. I wasn't there.
Look, we're talking about an oral tradition. We're
Right.
looking up writings of an oral tradition. We're gonna get some things wrong, but yeah, it's worth looking at every detail.
And it's propaganda. It's totally
every
because
time.
all I smell in so many of this is just Julius
time
Caesar
it's
and Roman generals reporting back on how terrible the Gauls and the Celts and the Germans are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's I think that's the real tragedy of the Druids, is that we really won't know what like a lot of the important facts about this society, because most of the things that we know about them came from the conquerors. So it's kind of a bummer, but there is one thing that I think that we can all agree on, and that is something that Julius Caesar mentioned, and that is something that I think has been immortalized, and that is, of course, the Wickerman.
Show Dan your robe.
Oh yeah, so my robe is actually from Caesar's palace.
Ah, funny.
So my Druidic robe actually is just an interpretation of something from Caesar.
I'm keeping it really real here in my apartment.
Yeah.
But yeah, the conqueror. Yeah.
Yeah, right. My perception of Druidism stems only from Caesar's tales. But speaking of Caesar's tales, here is the unbelievable idea of a Wickerman, and I think it's important for us to just take a moment, breathe, and just say that this is the totality of Caesar's account. A sacrifice, a form of sacrifice was the burning alive of victims in a large wooden effigy. That's literally the totality of it. And then and basically that's where the Wickerman story came from.
Right.
But what a story, right? So
well, just look at this picture. Like, there must be hundreds of people in that thing.
Yeah.
Just stacked up.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and animals. They didn't just fill it with people. They filled it with animals.
Yeah.
And fruits and vegetables. I act like I was there. I don't know why I'm saying that. Based on what I've seen, they gave all living things a chance to be burned alive. People, animals, vegetables, fruits, everything.
Okay, so let's dissect this a little bit. Number one, holy shit. Burning people alive inside a giant wooden effigy of a man is a really intense way. Number one, like we love sacrificing people on pyres and on wood, like because burning them sends them directly, like it's like the freeway to heaven, right? Like you go up in smoke and smoke goes up and you are up with the gods. So obviously that has something to do with it. But the fact that this is in the giant effigy of a man also speaks to the sacrifice of like sacrificing ourselves, and the idea that to be whole you need to be burnt down and then you're complete. I mean, there is so much going on with the idea of the Wicker Man that of course it still lives in folklore. Like, I want to say that there's, number one, Burning Man. We know that is just a direct of the Wicker Man. Know that there's burning of humanoid effigies across the globe. I know that there's some in Nordic countries, but I mean, this one in particular is gruesome. Obviously, like this picture in particular, like you see and again, this is from a Romantic period, so this is a dramatization of like what's actually going on.
Do you have the title of? Do you have the volume that this wood cutting is from?
I can find.
There's more. Okay, I don't know the title of it off my head, but I know what it is. There's something else going on in this picture that I want to address. So this was created in like the 16th or 17th century. This is created by an English woodcutter. Or picture maker at that time, talking about Wales.
Wales,
which was an open rebellion at the time. So not just
come
about the
with it.
Druids. There's a bunch of excuse my language shit to unpack from this one particular picture. He's talking about the Welsh right at his time as well.
Right.
This is a fascinating picture.
It is propaganda from the conquerors in order to make the conquered people look terrible.
And the Welsh are still into doing a bunch of this stuff. Like, this is what they're... I mean, I've never been to Wales, but I've read a little bit about Wales. They're very much into, like, kind of doing old things. Like, they roll the firing barrels down. You know, it's a big festival now. They do the Wickerman in Wales. It's like the county fair. They don't actually do people, but they do. You know, they burn like it's part of their heritage, and that's what I think is so interesting. Sorry, I hit it so hard I knocked my screen over. That's what's so interesting about this picture to me.
Yeah, I gotta say that, like, I mean, it's a powerful idea of burning a giant effigy with people inside of it. I think that, like, that captures the imagination. I don't know if you guys remember, but a dude walked into the pyre at Burning Man, like the actual Burning Man.
Is he okay?
No, he died.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
Yeah. The idea of
I'm sorry, that's not funny.
Burning people alive in a giant, like, human effigy. It is powerful in our psyche, and I think that that's why, like, there's been 2 movies made of Wickerman, despite it not being a really great storyline. 3 movies.
They made a sequel, didn't they?
Well,
they made the 70s Wickerman, the new Wickerman. Then they make a Wickerman 2.
I don't remember that. I don't really credit the Nicolas Cage movie.
Right.
No, I agree, but I do want to give a big shout out to the brilliant and talented Britt Ekland, who was definitely not in that film and did an incredible job on the Wicker Man movie. So
please tell me you got a picture of her. She's royalty.
I don't have a picture of her on me, but she was amazing in the Wicker Man movie. And of course, like, the visuals from that Wicker Man movie were powerful. It lasts through the ages because we have this in our psyche. And I'm sad to say that, like, it doesn't seem like a lot, but really there's not much for us to go off of for the Druids. And we could conjecture a lot about, like, what remains is steeped in mysticism, right? Like mistletoe as a holy herb. Like, Brass, anything you want to say about mistletoe? It's poison.
I had pulled it up. Sorry, you caught me looking at something I shouldn't have been looking at. I looked up Britt Ekland and I was like, what? Sorry. Mistletoe is I mean, obviously we still carry it through our modern American tradition to hang mistletoe. You must kiss under it. That in itself is a type of mystical spell. Take with it what you will. But it's a spell of in Christmas time when mistletoe is in fruit. In Druidic and pagan practices, Christmas is actually the birth of the new king.
Which makes sense with what we were talking about, the winter solstice, bringing all of the kids to mingle at Stonehenge.
Yes, it is a mingler, but there's an actual scientific reason that the mingler happens at the solstice of winter in December, and we're just lucky to have mistletoe bloom at that time, and it looks most alive at that time. Simply a coincidence, but what it's meant to represent is the sun is born, and from the winter solstice on, the days get longer and longer and longer. So the king lives. The boy king is born on winter solstice and thrives through summer. So today, June 21st, is the official summer solstice, which I think is why we're talking about Druids.
That is why.
This is the
Yeah.
death of the king. This is the death of the king boy. From now on, your days are getting shorter, 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 shorter. The king is dead. The
Yeah.
king will be reborn in Christmas. For us
What?
Western people.
Love
My-
Christmas.
Yeah.
Right,
okay.
and that's the whole idea of the Yule log and
Yes. Yes.
and holly,
and
right?
this whole
Holly and
reason for the
mistletoe.
Christmas tree, Dan.
We will 100%
Right.
be doing a piece, like a bit on the pagan origins of Christmas, because
Right.
I
Well,
love.
holly and mistletoe, right? Those are in bloom in winter. That's
Yeah.
why those are the plants
And
we
it
use.
serves that the sun becomes longer and longer and longer, so he is born during the solstice of the shortest day of the year. From that day forward, he gains strength.
Right.
From summer solstice,
Right.
he loses strength.
Yeah, you
So
will
we
not
are
find a
sacrificing the king today, and he will be reborn as a baby around New Year's, which we
You will never
celebrate newborn
find
babies.
you will never find a more adamant proponent and celebrator, atheist proponent and celebrator of Christmas than you will in me.
Really now?
I love Christmas. I love the celebration, the notion of redemption at the darkest hour, the idea
Wow.
of rebirth.
Oh, wow.
That subject matter, we will hit on that hard come the holidays. But I
Right.
want to give folks like a heads up that I love Christmas and I love that time of the year and I love all of the celebrations that go with it. And I do not believe in organized religion of any sort. So,
As someone who is dog sat for you and wife, I can attest to the fact that there is much love given to the whole home
yeah.
during these times.
Yeah.
You pay homage through so many details. I read them all, I see them all, I photograph them all. Some of my fondest memories are actually dog sitting for Tonya and Alf.
For sure.
Their apartment was a magical wonderland.
So we will definitely get into that. I do want to point out some important things about Druidism, kind of on the outswing here. That interest in Druidic culture and Druidic practices came into being along with these great mystical movements of the 20th century. You see here 1911, this picture is of a Druid processional in 1911. And this is, again, like a sort of a romantic reburgeoning of it. A lot of the art that we saw prior to this was from the Druid, like from the first romantic era where Druids were first kind of like looked on as like a return to nature and nature people. This is the second one of a kind of a Great Awakening era of interest in that kind of sort of occult knowledge of the Druids. And I think it's interesting to see Druidism pulled out from the grave, because let's face it, we know that Druids were basically all killed off by the Romans. So this is just a resuscitation of that practice by people who felt such a cultural, indigenous, native pull to it, that they're just like, we are going to drag this out in whatever form we can find it and give it the honor that it requires for our culture. So I think that's important. And then I think this is super interesting, because again, we can always knock the Druidic practices that we see around Stonehenge now, but let's not forget, this is a picture basically during the throes of World War II. Again, during the winter solstice, and again we see the people with the T-shirts on their head, where they are practicing a ritual that beckons to them as indigenous inhabitants of that sceptered isle that is England.
Right.
And you look at this, and you look at our native drum circles, and you in your eyes see the similar desire to reach out to our ancestral past and to touch them by performing those ceremonies. And I think it's just a beautiful image. Dan, you want to?
So something I'm seeing with the reinterest in the 19th century of Druids is several strains of romanticism coming together. I shouldn't say romanticism. Strains of modernism and romanticism coming together. So what I see, and you probably can find it if we really dug into, like, I'm sure there was an interest in like ancient German, Germanic tribal religions in the late 19th century in Germany, although they were very organized at the time. They may not have had time. But I'm seeing nationalism and an interest in the occult, right? Because this is right at the prime of Aleister Crowley and the occult coming in, the neo-Gothic architecture and framework, right? And sort of the demise of traditional Christianity, right? Like, this is still at the time of like Nietzsche and God is dead and we've killed him, but we still need this religion, but we're going to tie it up into, well, like, let's look at Nazism. Like, there's so much occult, Germanic history, whatever, in all of that.
I would say, Dan, that you really tapped into something important, and that is that part of manipulation of people involves tapping into deeply rooted emotions that they may not know that they have.
Right.
The same way that these lovely people in England continue to carry on the traditions of Druids, who giving it their best shot. I think that Nazis and fascists in particular really did a heck of a number of manipulating that desire to touch your ancestral past and connecting it to a modern movement. And I think you basically nailed that in the head, that nationalism can manipulate these ideas of a cultural heritage, and these very real emotions that folks want to reach back to that cultural heritage.
And I think something, it just dawned on me when you were saying that, something that I think is interesting, because I brought it up before, is the Rite of Spring, right? That ballet. I have no idea why it's in my head today. But the music is so modernistic, and it's the story of folk Slavic traditions, and this clash of modernism and folk traditions, right? Which I think we're still sort of sorting out in modern society, in our society today.
So for show and tell.
There you go.
For show and tell, I wanted to bring you guys 3 images from when Tony and I went to the winter solstice at Stonehenge. Number 1, they let you get up to the stones. I put my hands on the stones. I was there. King Arthur of the Druids led this ceremony where very similar, by the way, to our indigenous ceremonies here, where you face the north, south, east, west, and welcome the sun and welcome the wind and all of these different things. Basically the Celtic British version of that. But we went there, and as you can see, it's very crowded, and really, like, look at this picture, and it is thousands of people there greeting the sun at Stonehenge. Maybe less sex and maybe less ritual sacrifice, but certainly in a way that their ancestors did thousands of years ago. And for our best guesses as to what the Druids did, you can rest assured that they did gather here and they did greet the sun here. And the fact that still calls out to thousands of people, I think it was an amazing thing to do. All that being said, there is a kind of circusy feel to the whole thing. So this is another picture from our trip. And this is a man, a druid, I guess, wearing a plastic unicorn mask in front of one of the monoliths at Stonehenge, which is awesome. It was a party, and I don't think that the Druids would have frowned on that necessarily. If you need a mask to mingle, then wear you be you, is all I'm saying. And
they would have worn the actual horse's head.
There you go. And then I think the last bit of show and tell, which you guys will really appreciate, is in the car park where you had to park and then walk up. So we got not get VIP parking. Our bus driver was trying to get us VIP parking. We had to walk about, I would say, half a mile from the place that
Right.
in the
and the visitor center's not all that close to the actual structure either.
So we did not get to. We didn't even get to park at the visitor center. We got to park beyond the visitor center. But you know who did get choice parking? The Druids. So this is an actual yellow Druid van that got to park up close to the to the
it's
to
a
actual
church
Stonehenge.
Van. It's the church van for the Druids.
It is a church van for the Druids. So yeah, so you know, and I'll pop into the Facebook page. I'll pop in my my Twitter thread because I did a live Twitter recounting of we had a terrible tour guide that took us to this, and people were turning against him as we were doing the drive, and so there was a lot of there was a lot happening. And he was more into like UFOs and the energy of the stones, and not necessarily into the culture that built Stonehenge. There was a woman in a Starfleet uniform that she and her partner were also very angsty to get there, and were getting angry at him. It was a whole thing. I have a Twitter thread. That'll be my show and tell. I'll pop it into the Facebook group. But that's what I've got. Do you guys have anything for show and tell? I mean, Bress, your ensemble. What you got?
I got Boudica.
Oh yeah, nice.
Boudica is the first and last name you need to know about the resilience of the Druid tribes. Boudica was considered a warrior Celtic woman. Now, warrior class different than Druid class. Anybody who plays D&D would know that. But she had a husband who was the ruler of, let's call it like southeast to the east of England. Their Celtic tribe ruled and was in harmony with each other. When the Romans came, they sent her husband to negotiate. And the husband said, I'm going to do my very best negotiating with the Romans. They're very kill happy. But I'll do my very best. They shook on a deal. They agreed on a deal to leave the Druids alone, and the Romans would avoid and then the Romans the Romans killed the husband right after the agreement was made. Word got back to Boudica, and Boudica said, I'm now a widow of 2 daughters, and I'm going to take on this Roman army myself.
They did pretty terrible things to her daughters, right? Oh, Dan just left us.
Well, bye, Dan.
No, he'll be back.
They forcibly raped the 2 teenage girls in front of their mother.
Yeah.
And then said, excuse me, lady, we don't talk to women about stuff like this, but now you see what we're capable of. Bear that in mind next time you push back against us. Rome is coming to England. And she said, okay, I'm going to think on that. She got down in her inner self. She probably tapped into the earth. She probably tapped into the cosmos. And she came back with a game plan. Hell yeah, Alf.
Yeah.
She came back with a game plan, and she burned down to the ground every Roman army camp. London was burnt to the ash. Everything around London was burnt to the ash. And Boudica was the woman that led this military conquest.
Yeah.
And every single statue, every single thing written about her, again, not permitted to write anything in Druid culture. Hi, welcome back.
Thank you. I have no idea what happened.
Every single statue the Romans grabbed after they killed her. They finally did get her and kill her. They buried and destroyed every single thing that had her name on it, everything that resembled her, every statue, everything went underground. And the Romans acted like a woman never kicked their ass. Boudica, I found a book inside the Philosophical Research Society's biography section of
Ooh.
the library. The biography section has Women Warriors as a book.
Oh, nice.
I opened that up because I had time to kill there at work one day, and I opened it up and started reading about Boudica and was honestly moved to tears by myself, no one around.
Yeah.
I moved myself to tears thinking this woman had everything taken from her, and she showed the Romans what a real warrior spirit was, and they did not expect to engage with a woman on the battlefield, and she whooped their Roman asses.
Yep.
Boudica.
Yeah.
Look into
There's an image of Boudica here with her two daughters, like bringing the Celtic tribes, like unifying them and getting them ready to go against the Romans. And speaking of that nationalist call, you know, there are statues to Boudica now across England, and she is seen as sort of a cult hero now in the UK. So I think you know, like it's amazing again just how like thousands of years separate us, and how desperate we are to touch each other through those years. I do feel like that is ultimately, it speaks to the human condition that really all we want to do is be acknowledged, loved, and love in return, and everything else is just the feathers and the mustaches and the gold and all of these different things that we know at the bitter end make no difference. And I think that Boudica's story resonates with us so much more than any suit of armor or any breastplate of any Roman who trounced along, any remnant of a coin. Dan just keeps insisting on leaving. But I think it's just a beautiful story, Brassy. I think that's a totally solid show and tell. All right, I think we've come to the end, and I'm not gonna rescue Dan from this. So what I did want to do, though, because it would be foolish of us not to, is really give a moment.
Are you going to play Spinal Tap, or are you going to play Wickerman?
Oh, I'm going to play Wickerman. Oh, though I should have.
Hey, Dan.
There he is. Dan.
I have no idea what's going on. I keep getting booted.
Look, no one wants to listen to a Druid today, but it is Mercury retrograde, so electronic things are going to go wacky.
There you go. Dan.
That could be it.
What you got?
Okay, so mine is, we talked pretty heavily, you know, about Stonehenge, and it's a really cool thing to see. I was fascinated by the whole thing. But on the way out there, what I was really fascinated about was what Salisbury Plain is to the English army. And so these were my favorite signs on the road out to Stonehenge. Because it's an armored training area for the English army.
Did you see any?
No. No, I didn't. I was so hoping that we would just have to slam on our brakes.
Like those Russian videos, those Russian dash cams you see, where it's just like, oh, look, comrade tank crossing road. Amazing.
Yeah, just, but I've never seen one in the United States. Because it's just open roads. It's not like on some hidden area. And it is. They use parts of Salisbury Plain because, you know, it's a huge area of England.
Huge open area, yeah.
And part of it is military training grounds. And they just use the roads. So that was my little show and tell for today about Stonehenge.
Awesome. All right. Awesome episode, you guys. Let's finish off with a little bit of Wickerman. All
right.
I am and this is a crap video, of course, but look, they're talking about, you know, the something must die, and all of the rituals that we talked about, the women in armor, right? This is a female-led ritual.
Because we're the gasoline in the engine, remember that.
And then, of course, poor old Nick Cage in this one.
Not the bees.
Spoiler alert.
Not the bees.
But there's the blue, the paint yourself blue.
Right. The blue thing is still big.
The thrill of sending someone directly up in smoke, right? The rebirth. Taking a picture, I guess. Just if you get a chance, watch Wickerman and think back.
Do the Christopher Lee version
Christopher
first.
Lee, I agree. Christopher Lee.
That's
They didn't have the actual
Yeah.
burning. Like I wanted to show the burning, and they didn't have that ready to go on YouTube. All right, you guys, awesome episode. We'll see everybody
See ya.
next weekend. Bye.
See you next week. Bye.